in this, with this rehabilitation of the building there. The exterior framing and sheathing inspections have been completed. The electrical and plumbing rough-in inspections were scheduled for yesterday, so should be completed by this week. Drywall delivery is expected also this week by today. The upper waterproof decks at the front bar and also the bar that's facing the intercoastal waterway is nearly complete. They're waiting on remaining deck boards. The entire entry ADA ramp and deck that's surrounding the building is completely repaired and replaced. Second page, Amy. There you go. HVAC ductwork is on site and they're beginning to hang it. The exterior dry fire protection systems and the interior wet systems are about 80% complete. The fire department connections were replaced to meet our fire department requirements. The exterior siding is in progress. You can see a picture on the second slide that shows that. The AV and security roughings are also complete. And the TPO roofing above the upper kitchen is scheduled to be installed this week. The tenants continue to evaluate options to provide ADA access to the third floor to the physically challenged. Douglas had a meeting last week with the restaurant tenant and a vendor evaluating the feasibility of one of those options. Our goal would be to have a more comprehensive discussion with City Council about next steps at the next City Council meeting, which is what we had discussed at the Real Property Committee earlier this month. Salmon's Dredging started to work on the dock, the section up dock on the intercoastal side that's part of the lease for the restaurant, and that work started on Monday of this week.
Yeah, just a couple of things here. Do we expect any kind of feedback from the Marker 116 group this week as to the status of elevator options?
We requested additional information about the alternatives that they're considering. We may not have final plans or final cost estimates by Friday, but we feel like the more we wait on this, the less or the more challenging it could be for the building, for the construction. They're estimating completing the building by the end of this year. So we certainly want to get ahead of it. It's already been a month and a half that we started this conversation. So our goal is to at least present to City Council the options that are being considered and get some reaction from the group about what would be acceptable and what would not be acceptable.
Yeah, because we're up against the clock here, basically, because it's, we've got we've got the meeting next week and one more meeting.
Correct.
And this council needs to face this situation and have some good, thorough discussion around it as to what next steps would be. And hopefully there'll be a favorable response from the Marker 116 group. One other thing too, I was talking to John Bushnell yesterday, and I think they're also doing some work with the termite prevention, that sort of thing. So they're making a lot of progress throughout the building and underneath the building. And it really looks great from what I can tell on the exterior. I haven't had an interior tour recently, but from what I can see, it looks like it's going to be a great looking restaurant. And it is, I also want to make the note again, it is ADA compliant other than that top floor. So, they're doing all the extras and have done some really nice things there. It's just that we need to look at the possible solution we would have for that third floor. That's it. Thank you.
All right, we'll go ahead with the Marina Dock Rehabilitation Project. So for Dock Area C, which is the restaurant and the phase docks, as you all know, that has been turned over for public use. There are a few punch list items that they're working through. There are some electrical cover plates that have not yet been received. They were expected to arrive on Monday. As of this afternoon, they hadn't been received yet, but they are expecting them this week. The there are a couple of standpipes that are crooked that need to be straightened. So they're working on that. And also we'll be repainting and recoating all 4 of them in this section. There is also a freeboard issue on 2 specific locations. One is by the pony float, and those are being addressed. The plan is to replace the spacers that are in between the dock and the floating and the floats. So that's spending. There are a few other items. There's an issue with the electrical we're working with Epic Engineering on. So just final items that need to be straightened out before obviously the project is fully completed. The charter docks, hopefully you've been over there and have seen the new docks and the new piles. All that has been installed. Area B has been turned over as of last week to electrical and water utility contractors. There is one triangular shaped portion of dock that if you look at the design in the big picture that's on that slide, that's the gangway to the fixed or floating pier that's runs parallel to the boat ramp. So the design calls for a triangular shaped piece of dock that would be installed where that boat is staged, that would facilitate access to the other finger piers. So that piece is expected with the next shipment of docks. So that's the one portion that hasn't been installed. Everything else has. They're estimating 2 to 3 weeks for the completion of the utilities in that section. So this is much simpler than the restaurant and the face docks. The utilities are only installed on that long pier that runs parallel to the bulkhead, not on the fingers. So it shouldn't take as long as it did for the restaurant and the face docks for the utilities to be installed and completed. Dock area A, the delivery of the fuel platform is expected in November, on November 15th. It'll come in sections and it has to be assembled in the shipyard, just like all the other docks have been. They are shooting for the assemble to be completed by the 29th, November 29th. And at that time is when the crane and barge is coming back to then remove the fuel HUD and the fuel docks and all of that and start installing the fuel docks in that area. Between the 15th and the 29th, Petroleum Marine is coming to secure the fuel system, remove the dispensers and all that, so that by the 29th, when the barge and the crane comes, it's empty and they're just taking it away. After the float, the docks have been installed, the construction of the fuel HUD will begin, and then it'll be turned over to utilities. Same process as the 2 that we have just completed. We'll move on to drainage phase 3. Sure.
I sent you an email on the end of Dr. AC where that gateway was washing out.
Yes.
It hadn't been approached yet, and it's only getting worse last time I was there. I don't know if everybody is. Because if you come off the end of that gateway, and you don't realize it, I mean, you're falling into a 2-foot hole.
Oh, yes. Oh, and this is on the restaurant side. So that has been filled. I followed up with the contractor today and they have informed me that they did take care of that. I haven't been there today to double check, but I will tomorrow morning. If you go there before I do, just.
I didn't look at it this morning.
Well,
Last week it wasn't. Sorry.
Yes.
and there was a slippery spot that my husband noticed.
Mhm.
And I know that Brian asked for some more specifics about where it was, and I did not get back to him, but I'm hoping that that was located. And do you happen to know if that was resolved?
I don't know if that's been resolved, but I did share that with the engineer and the contractor, so I can follow up on that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, phase 3 drainage. As you all know, we currently have permits on hand for both the 30th and the 36th Avenue outfall projects. Last time we talked, we hadn't received the Army Corps permit for the Forest Trail one. Now we have it. We opened bids or had a bid opening I should say, last Friday, October 15th, we only received one bid, which is the reason why we didn't open it. Once we open, those numbers become public, and we really want to make sure that we encourage a competitive process for this project. So we had, Douglas had a good conversation with the engineers the day of the bid opening, and we had a meeting today with them as well to discuss how we can change the language to the RFP to make it more appealing. We've been talking to the potential bidders or potential contractors about what the issues were, if they were changed, what could help them prepare and produce bids. And we talked about some of them. One issue was that the engineers were very specific about the types of materials and specifications for some of these valves, flapper valves. So what we're doing is changing the language so that they would have greater flexibility to propose alternative materials. Still would have to be approved by the engineers during the process, but hopefully that helps. The supply chain issues are, severely impacting this project, as we've seen with all of our other projects. So that should be something that helps in the second go round. Also, some of the issues were associated with listing the Forest Trail outfall as an alternate. The reason we did it is at the time the bid went out, we did not have all the permits for that project. And we didn't know if at the time that a contract was going to be awarded, if we had it, if that would be part of the overall project. Now we have all permits on hand, so we can just make it as part of the full scope of the project. Our goal would be to revise the RFP. That's the reason we had a meeting this morning about it, and open bids, and then have a recommendation to Ways and Means for your November meeting. Our goal would be to provide the information, at least 4 or 5 days before that meeting. I know that in November, historically, City Council has both Ways and Means and City Council on the same date. So you would not have the typical week in between Ways and Means and City Council between committee and then final approval. So we're kind of tight on timeline, but we're going to do everything we can to have a complete information about the project and the potential award for you to make an informed decision next month. Yes, sir.
Yeah, we received one bid. It's unopened. Now, if we change the language here for potential bidders to propose alternate materials, is that unopened bid, which we don't know what's in it, but does that go back to that original bidder so that they can rework their bid?
Yeah, they would have to submit
Okay.
a new bid.
All right, so you just returned that to them, said, here, have another go at it, if you will. Okay.
Correct.
Yeah, based on the new specs. That's what I was getting at. I just went the long way in getting there. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Phase 3 drainage internal projects. The one that's pending is 41st and Avenue and Forest Trail. The contractor was doing final pressure testing yesterday on all the relocated utilities, and the new drainage pipes were going to be laid down this week. So that's the plan. And we've had good weather, so we don't anticipate any delays. If everything continues as scheduled with no other complications, the final walkthrough and the project closeout would begin next week. And then we're gonna open 41st Avenue.
It's been quiet.
All right, overhead and underground electric conversion, no new updates since we executed the design and engineering estimate. They did reach out to the city recently, the Dominion Energy team, asking some questions about the drainage system on 21st Avenue for them to consider into their design. But they're continuing to work, and we executed the agreement mid-August. So 3 to 4 months before we have a full design and engineered plans for the 21st Avenue portion. And with that, so ends my report.
Susan,
Question about the waterway multi-use path, have we heard anything from the county on potential award of money from them for that yet?
No, typically those awards are done later in the year, maybe by next month. No, I did let you know via email that the city submitted a CDBG MIT grant for Phase 3, the 41st Avenue outfall and the Waterway Boulevard project. And we are also working on a submission for the BRIC grant that's due mid-November. So both of those projects are included as part of the scope.
Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you, Desiree. Old business items, update and discussion of American Rescue Plan funding. Debbie touched on that already, $1,000,001 we've received. And Randy, to your question, was trying to find it real quick, almost positive it's a May-ish kind of time frame for the second tranche. Our next item is discussion and consideration of wage and compensation adjustments with our presentation from our Evergreen folks. Just a couple of quick comments before we go to that. This has been a long timeline. I think we've been very careful in our process and approach. And tonight I wanted to have Evergreen spend a little bit of time regrounding us in the process and let you know the cities we've looked at, the work that's been done to date, the process and kind of the foundation, if you will, of what will become our new wage and comp structure as we move forward. And then next week or next month, when we have the combination Ways and Means and Council, we'll have a final decision as far as which path or which alternative we want to use. But tonight we'll get grounded in the foundation. I want to talk about funding alternatives and get your feedback on that. And then, for council residents and more importantly, our employees that are here tonight and listening, we are still shooting for a 1/1 effective date, and that should happen. So we'll finalize everything next month through Ways and Means and Council. But I just wanted to pause today. Three of us spent, I don't know, 5 or 6 hours last week trying to finalize this presentation for you all and finalize a decision point. But kind of last minute, Mount Pleasant came out with their wage and comp survey data. So we felt it prudent just to take a pause for 1 more month since it's our neighbor, and make sure we have good numbers from them to take a look at from our comparison of what we're going to look at with Evergreen. So it felt prudent to me to do that. I hope you're okay with that. Again, we'll still hit our 1/1 effective date for everyone. And I think that's it. So want to introduce our guest tonight?
Can I ask a quick question?
Sorry,
Of
John. Yes.
that? Is Mount Pleasant sharing the fullness of their study with us?
Fullness is the key word. Yeah.
Yeah.
Desiree's had a couple of conversations already. And I think we're expecting it today. So I hope we're going to.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Eric.
One quick comment on that. There was a little pressure applied there too.
Pressure to the wound.
You'll see in the presentation as we go, Angel goes through it, they were part of our peer communities that were going to be reviewed, and they did not provide it at the time that analysis was being done, partly because they were in the middle of their own comp. So now that we have it, we really want to have an opportunity to fully evaluate it.
Great.
All right, I will introduce Angel. She is with the Evergreen Consulting Group that we've been working on for almost a year now. We have grown very fond of Angel and all the work that she has done. And she has been very patient with us, and we just want to have a thorough conversation with you all and also allow you the opportunity to ask questions about the methodology and how we got to the numbers that we'll be presenting to you, and just again, get grounded on the methodology, and then we'll have the funding discussion.
Everybody have a copy of the deck. It was a separate email that came.
Got it.
It was shared this morning.
Got it.
Susan, you-
I just sent it to her.
Going to share the slides, if you don't mind using the mic on the phone. I do that. Thank you.
You're good.
Everyone has a
I think-
preference.
Is it on?
Yes.
The microphone on?
Is the microphone on?
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
Let me adjust it because I'm a little taller than I thought. All right. Thank you, council and mayor, for your attention this evening. I ask that you hold all questions to the very end. So let me get through the presentation. And if there are any questions, we can go ahead and flip back to the slides that pertain to those questions. Next slide, please. So just to give you an agenda for tonight, I'm going to go through a refresher on the study process. It has been about a year since we first started this engagement. I'm also going to go through an overview of our findings from our assessment of current conditions, the compensation philosophy of the city, as well as the classification review, compensation review, as well as unveil the new pay plans as they stand with our current analysis. So in terms of completed tasks, we have conducted employee outreach. That was done, I believe, earlier this year with one of our team members, Nancy Berkeley, came and spoke with everyone at the city to get their feedback about, what's working well, what could be improved, and I'll go into those in more detail in the next slide or so. We also assessed the current conditions of the current pay system, and I'll unveil what those results were. We reviewed the city's compensation philosophy to get an idea of moving forward. What does the city want to do in terms of their compensation practices? What are their goals for future compensation practices of their employees? We also conducted the external equity analysis by surveying the market to determine what are those market competitive salary ranges, as well as taking a look at those benefits offerings. And we revised the pay plan to be competitive with the market, and we individually assigned each position to fit into the pay plan structure. So we do have separate pay plans for general employees as well as police and fire, but I'll go into more detail on that later on. All right, so remaining tasks, as everyone had made mention, we do fully intend to review that Pleasant compensation report. When we contacted them previously about, can you give us any data? They said, well, we're in the middle of our own study. We can give you some data, but it's going to be outdated pretty soon. So we do want to make sure that we have take our due diligence to review that data and make sure that we have the most up-to-date information before we finalize everything. And then we will also develop some optional methods for implementing the revised pay plan and pay ranges. So we had extensive discussions already, but of course, with the numbers coming in from Mount Pleasant, that could change the conversation a little bit. We're also going to prepare and provide drafted final reports, provide a training and study methodology to the human resources staff here at Isle of Palms so they can maintain the pay plans moving forward, as well as provide revised job descriptions. So from the employee outreach, we received the following feedback. So a lot of employees really enjoy working with the Isle of Palms. They enjoyed serving the local community, the residents, the tourists. However, there was general concern that the salaries were not competitive with the local market, as well as some concern that there was lack of clarity about salary progression. So they kind of have a pay range, but not a lot of people understood. So how do I get my salary from where it is now to somewhere up the scale? We also reviewed the city's current pay structure. So currently, positions have pay ranges, but each position has its own pay range. So that can be rather difficult for a human resources department to keep track of because it's a very ununiform system. There are a lot of inconsistencies with it. We did note that the range spreads for each position, which simply means what's the difference between that minimum and maximum, is 50%. So there's ample room for growth. But again, when you have, all these different positions with all different kinds of ranges, it's very difficult to maintain. We also conducted a quartile analysis to see what are the distribution of employee salaries across all their ranges. So we see that overall, if you take a look there, considering that the first and second quartile are below that midpoint, we see that the majority of salaries are below that midpoint. So that can be an artifact of, newer employees are generally going to be in that lower quartile, but also there could be some concern about salary progression in general. So we focus on that midpoint because the midpoint is the point at which an employee is performing their job proficiently, satisfactorily, and should be at a market competitive position. So next, we reviewed the city's compensation philosophy to see, moving forward, where would the city like to be? So it was determined that the city would like to be competitive with the market and also leading for the public safety position, so police and fire. The city also expressed that they would like to have equitable and flexible pay practices. And in terms of pay plan designs, it was desired to have an open range structure for employees and a step plan for fire and police. This will probably make a little more sense when I show you what the plans look like. But when I say open range, that means that there is a minimum, midpoint, and maximum, but salaries are free to fall anywhere between that minimum and maximum. With a step plan, on the other hand, there is going to be a grade and step system. So for instance, there may be 25 steps in a plan, ironically, what I set up for the city of Isle of Palms. And depending on your years of service, you're going to land on a very particular step. So for instance, if you have been a police officer for 5 years, that's your step 5. You've been a sergeant for 10 years, your salary is going to be on step 10. So those are the key distinctions. And I think it will make a little more sense when I show you those pay plans visually. And then also for increasing pay moving forward, it'll be based on tenure, particularly for the public safety, as well as performance or merit to reward those hardworking employees moving forward.
May I ask a question? Thank you. Competitive and leading, are those defined terms that, can you
Yes.
review that with us?
So competitive generally means that you're in the average of the market. So you may not be the absolute top dog, but you are going to be competitive. So you're not the lowest pay, but you are within, for lack of better terms, you're within the same ballpark as everyone else. Now, when we talk about a lead, that's when you're trying to separate from the rest of the pack a little bit more. So with lead, that usually can refer to anywhere from like 10% above the average or 20% above, whatever that is. You're trying to distinguish yourself from the pack.
Okay. I thought that we were trying to lead beyond just public safety, but did we not? I guess that was not our direction. Okay. All right.
So as part of this process, we conducted a classification review. So what we did is we asked all employees to complete a job assessment tool, or we simply call it JAT for short. But effectively, it was a survey through which employees told us what their duties and responsibilities were, and we had supervisors review that feedback. So yes, we have job descriptions from Human Resources, but those job descriptions are not necessarily always up to date. And who better to ask than the employees themselves? What do you actually do on a day-to-day basis? What are your responsibilities? Do you supervise anyone? How many people you supervise? That was all information we obtained from this job assessment tool. So then we scored all these job assessment tools to determine was the internal hierarchy at the city. So for instance, within each department, we determined was the hierarchy of these positions. So for example, picking on public works as a concrete example, it's determined that, your vehicle CDL drivers are at one level. Your foremen, however, are going to be at a higher level because they have more supervisory responsibilities. Your assistant director is going to be higher than that because they have more responsibility. And your director of public works is going to be at the top of that department because they have even more responsibility. The work is more complex. So that's effectively what we were doing within departments as well as across departments at the city. And then also as needed, we made some title changes. There weren't too many that required changes, but there were maybe just a couple where we've read the job assessment tool and we thought, it could be titled something else that makes a little bit more sense based on the duties described. So over there, it probably reads a little bit better on your own screen as opposed to up there. But we conducted the salary survey and we obtained information from the peers that are marked in bold there. So right now, Mount Pleasant is not marked in bold, but it will be when we finalize that report. But effectively, we obtained salary range data from 16 public sector peers, and we obtained information for 29 classifications. So that's not all the positions at the county, but it's a pretty representative sample across the various departments in terms of what is the market paying for these positions. And the average number of matches was 6.4. So while it would be nice that, we had 16 matches across the board, not all cities are organized exactly the same way. Not all positions exist at every organization, but 6.4 is still a very robust number for the market survey. Next, please. Oh, sorry. This one. Yes, thank you. Sorry. All right. So then we compared the Isle of Palms salary ranges compared to the peers. And we did that by the various categories. So the general employees versus fire versus police. And we see that overall, the city's current ranges are pretty significantly behind the market. So 14.7 for general employees, 11.6 for fire, and 19.4 for police, which suggests that it is definitely prudent to revise those salary ranges so that way they align better with the market, especially with how competitive it is getting nowadays. So in addition to the salary survey, we also conducted a benefits survey. So the following peers provided data for the benefits survey. And we found that the medical deductibles were pretty competitive with the peers. A lot of your South Carolina peers pretty much offer similar medical plans. Retirement offerings were also competitive. However, an area of improvement were the annual vacation leave accrual rates. So we noticed that the rates were pretty low overall. And also the rate at which you can obtain a higher amount of vacation leave was also pretty low. So for instance, in some municipalities, you can start earning quite a bit of leave as little as 5 or 10 years. That was not necessarily the case when we were comparing NC Isle of Palm. So that was something that just kind of stood out as, wow, this could be an area of improvement if there's something that council would be amenable to.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Yeah.
In terms of insurance, most or all government employees in the state all rely on PIBA? No? Most
Not
do?
always,
A lot do? Oh, okay.
a lot, but not
So
all.
many of the people on this list are probably using the state system of PIBA, but no?
Not necessarily, no.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Some, like Mount Pleasant has their own program.
Oh, do they? Okay. But did you look at the amount that they're asking their employees to pay on a for the insurance? You mentioned deductibles, but
Mhm.
it doesn't mention here that the amount that they're asked to cover of their policy, but you did look at that.
We did look at that. So the premiums, they were a little bit higher, but not something that jumped out to me as something that had to be addressed today as a significant problem.
It seems to me actually that Isle of Palms has very low premiums that they ask their employees to pay in comparison, based on anecdotal information that I've received.
Well, particularly for employee only, it's usually employee plus family that is a huge area of concern. Okay. So all those findings lead to the proposed pay plans that we have developed for the different employee groups. So for the general employees, as I alluded to before, it's an open range plan with 20 pay grades and range spreads of 55%. We did increase that from 50. General best practices for a range spread is between 55 and 70%. And we found that in relation to the peers in the market, most of them had range spreads of 55%. So we widened them a little bit to be consistent with the market, but also give employees a little bit more room for growth in that general pay plan. For the police, we developed that step plan with 5 grades and 25 steps with a 1.25 step increase for each step, meaning that for every step you go up, it's a 1.25% salary increase. And the range spread is 35%. So due to the nature of the design of these step plans, the range spreads are naturally going to be a little bit narrower, but that's very common in the market. Now with the fire step pay plan, it's pretty much the same design, 5 grades, 25 steps with a 1.25 step increase. So in the next few slides, I'll show you visually what they actually look like. So that is the proposed pay plan for general employees. So as I mentioned before, you have a minimum, midpoint, and maximum, but salaries are free to fall anywhere between that minimum and maximum. So that provides flexibility for maybe you have employees who are doing outstanding with merit increases, you give them a little bit more. You have an employee who's doing maybe the bare minimum, they don't get the merit increase, or perhaps they're under disciplinary action and they don't get an increase. This plan is good for having that kind of flexibility. You'll also note that the minimum for the lowest pay grade does meet that $15 per hour minimum wage, living wage that a lot of organizations are interested in nowadays. Next, please. All right, so this is the proposed pay plan for police. Now, if I had a longer piece of paper or a much bigger screen in PowerPoint, it would actually go all the way across. But for the purpose of space and for you to be able to somewhat read it, I had to chunk it up this way. But you see that there are 25 steps. So the idea is that on an employee's anniversary, they would get a step. Now, I'm also well aware that with your merit system, usually an employee can even get a 2.5% increase. So If the employee does really well on a merit, they can get up to a two-step increase, depending on how those performance evaluations are, as well as the budget. And then for the fire, it's basically the same thing. So we have that similar design, similar mechanism of 1 year per anniversary date, as well as the ability to have up to two steps depending on their merit or performance evaluation. And that concludes the presentation. I will take additional questions at this time.
Well done. It's very well done.
I have a question.
Kevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on the STEP plan program, how does that compare to our peer group, Mount Pleasant, Charleston? Are they on the STEP program as well?
I need to take a look at what Mount Pleasant is doing. In terms of other organizations, it's mixed, honestly. Some like to have the STEP plan, some keep it open range. Typically, what it comes down to for public safety and STEP plan is there's a lot of pressure from employees saying, well, we want to know if I've been here for 5 years, where's my salary going to be? And it's kind of treated as a recruitment and retention tool, because you can point to that and say, well, look, if you're with us for 5 years, here's about where your salary will be. So it's honestly mixed.
And that still would be contingent upon satisfactory performance, though.
Yes, absolutely.
Are you taking into effect, like being on Alphonse? Most of our employees cannot afford to live on Alphonse, so they have to travel, and most of them travel a great distance. And during that travel, Charleston is so far behind in our infrastructure that there's a lot of time it takes to get to work, a lot of time it takes to get home from work. So, are we taking all those factors into play?
Yes, absolutely. That was taken into account when looking at your general market as well as with the wages. So as I mentioned, the absolute bare minimum is $15 per hour, which I know is still not the greatest salary on the planet, but it does significantly improve from, gosh, I'm blanking on what the minimum is currently, but it's definitely not $15 per hour right now.
Susan?
Well, so when we're looking at this proposed police pay plan, this is actually the numbers that and so starting 43,000. What is our current starting? Do we have that for?
You're talking about the delta change from today?
Yeah, exactly. I'm just curious to see how this is reflective of the changes that, of what is currently being made at that.
We have a schedule that shows all the differences between, our current pay ranges per job description or per title and how they fall into this new pay plan. This is the average calculation. For a certified police officer, it was roughly $42,000 currently. So we're not that far off from the average of the market. You may recall that a couple of years ago, actually right before Chief Gornett joined our team, the city did some targeted adjustments to the police department because we were having some issues. And at that time, it was just that department, but we looked at what other communities were doing and made adjustments to the whole department at that point, officers. So that shows that at least at that grade step of a patrol officer, where we're not that far off from the average of the market.
Even if we're trying to lead.
Well, this is just this is the average
Oh,
of
okay.
the market analysis. We have been discussing if the city wanted to be somewhat more aggressive in
Okay.
certain departments, that would be a follow-up conversation. But
Okay,
here
gotcha.
you're looking at just the average market
These are
analysis.
averages. Okay, that makes me feel better because I was expecting to see more dramatic increases than what I'm looking at here. So that was, $15 an hour is, what the local market is paying right now, but I'm afraid that we will quickly see that go up even at the minimums. So I just want to make sure that we're being aggressive in how we're in our compensation.
Mayor?
I got all kinds of questions. Like the employee input, I mean, you actually spoke to everybody?
Just about everyone, I do believe. My project manager, Nancy Berkeley, was facilitating those conversations. I can't recall off the top of my head, we spoke to so-and-so and so-and-so, but we did talk with all the department heads and all employees were invited to participate in those focus group sessions.
No, I love that. I mean, that's what we want. We want
Mhm.
happy employees. We want to know what's right, what's wrong. What can we do to improve? Because it really, it's a family. I mean, it's a city family. We all live and work, day in, day out. Police come and leave and the fire department comes and spends the night. So there's a really cross section of everything, but our goal is to make everybody, have a good work environment and a career that we can keep somebody here. So you feel confident that you got those kind of answers.
Oh, absolutely. There's usually no hesitation to tell a consultant what's up and what's not going well.
Good, that's what I want to hear.
Randy,
I'm
just-
sure Robert gave us the best answers.
Yeah, just personnel committee discussion also was things like the national police shortage, we're not going to solve with pay. And it was also encouragement with city administration to understand thinking outside the box a bit. There are things that pay doesn't solve a problem when people don't wish to have that particular job.
Right.
But having things like a Marine unit, giving people different opportunities and cross training are things that, city administration can do beyond the confines of a budget to make us more competitive. But the general consensus of personnel was, we do want to lead in public safety, right? It's not to be, quote, competitive. It's to lead and recognize that, the turnover that we have in those departments when you have, police certifications, fire certifications is a very unhealthy trend that we want to get on top of. So, Chair Moy, did I do that justice?
Nailed it.
I'd say lead and retain.
I just think it needs to be clear because this chart can easily be seized upon and without the right context might cause some concern if it is perceived that this is what we're looking seriously at passing. That we're actually looking at doing better than this.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that message is loud and
Yeah, and
clear.
I think when we get to the funding alternative conversation, we'll tell you where some of the alternatives we've looked at specifically for public safety.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Mayor, do you have another question?
Just out of curiosity, do most police departments allow officers to drive their cars home? 'Cause I think that's a good benefit. And also it helps the neighborhoods where they live when you have the police cars in the front.
Again, I have the rather vague answer of it depends. So I know that's a benefit that a lot of police officers do enjoy when a city does offer it. And when there's a municipality that offers it and you're the municipality that doesn't, you definitely get an earful.
Right, and I'm sure we hear from the other side of city employees, well, if they get a car, we don't get a car. So, there's pros and cons no matter which way you look at it.
Right, and some have a limitation of you have to live X amount of miles within city limits to have it, so that can also be a point of concern. So if you are going to offer it, I would urge you caution when evaluating that policy, because if you put in a city limits, like, well, I live even further than that, what's the point of this take-home car program?
I just wanted to point out to Councilmember Smith's question, the reason why the averages are placed here for discussion purposes is just to establish a baseline. How do we compare with the market at an average, baseline? We can go above that, but I would say that this is the minimum that we would do.
Thank you. I think just the headline says proposed police pay plan, so that could be easily misconstrued. Just if you go by the headline, which a lot of
Good
people do.
journalist.
We can make those adjustments and make sure that the updated version is
In the packet.
available.
Good.
What else? Other questions before we talk about how do we pay for all this?
You can help with that?
I think that's Debbie's job.
Yeah, I think
I give Debbie the numbers and then she,
She works magic.
she works
Yeah,
magic,
works magic.
is presented with a challenge.
Mr. Chair,
Mayor, go ahead.
historically, are police and fire that kind of difference across the board
Historically at Isle of Palms or just in general?
in general?
Thank you.
We are seeing that nowadays, police and fire are fiercely competitive. So for instance, we could do a study in one area and then 6 months later, suddenly the market can change because everyone's just trying to one up each other. So it's definitely one of those areas where it's easy to fall behind the market pretty quickly if you're not paying attention. So it is, those are numbers that we have been seeing more recently because everyone's trying to address this issue of recruitment and retention with police.
It just seems like over the last 2 years with COVID and all this negativity on social media, I feel horrible for our police officers who are getting beat up when they don't deserve to be beaten up. You know, it's just been a very trying 2 years for everybody.
Absolutely. Everywhere across the nation has been experiencing the same thing, very sadly.
Just a question, Angel, because I know I have this question to you, but for the benefit of the group. So the beginning, the first step for firefighter one compared to the first step for police officer one, there's a differential there. And that's something that you see across the board. It's pretty consistent that starting salary difference.
Yeah, that's definitely what we see across the market. I won't get into whether or not that's fair, but that's something we see across the market in general.
And just for again, the benefit of the group, the firefighters, unlike police officers, because of the schedules that they work, where they work shift work, 24, 48 off, there is a component of what we call scheduled mandatory overtime that's not included in this number. And that roughly averages, again, depending on the person and the employee, about $3,000 to $4,000. So when you add that onto these numbers, it makes it somewhat more comparable to police department. But just wanted to clarify that
Thank you for saying
that
that.
mandatory scheduled overtime is not included in these numbers
So that's 3,000 to 4,000 more per year.
on
On
average. Don't quote me on that because
Right.
again, it depends on
But that
Okay.
helps a great deal. Thank you.
correct. That's it.
Thank you. Very good. Great work. I know we have pushed it longer than anybody wanted it at this point, but I think we've been methodical. Let's say that.
You don't hold the record for the longest.
We're not leading in that
Yeah.
area. That's great. No, yeah,
I
yeah, good
don't know.
point.
I wasn't on that one.
So let's talk about,
Thank you.
Amy, if you don't mind going to the
Thank you. again.
funding option page that we sent you late today. So let's talk about how we get from here to implementation to future years. So you've got a slide in front of you, sorry, and now on the screen. So implementation alternatives for current fiscal year, we are fine from what we have in the budget standpoint. So again, remember, this would be effective 1/1 of 22. So it's only a 6-month money effect, if you will, from a city's finances for 6 months in 22. So all the alternatives we looked at, which have been about 8 or 9 with tweaks and a lot of arranging of numbers, but any options you look at for current fiscal year, we have plenty of money in the budget to cover, okay? A month ago or 2 months ago, part of the charge, I think, Mayor, from you was, let's talk about the out years. That's really where we get the full year effect, the compounding effect and such. So the next bullet, if you look at fiscal 23 and beyond, all the options that we've looked at, and these are all in cost, benefits, fringes, everything. It's anywhere from 83,000 to about 260,000 annually above our forecast. Okay, so we don't have budgets out that far yet. It's just a forecast number at this point. And Susan, to your questions, so kind of obvious, maybe not. So the 260,000 would be, say it's a 60 or 70% premium on a public safety range that you just looked at. Okay, so that's a dial we can tweak, to take people higher. Say it again.
The Cadillac bird.
Yeah. 260,000.
I got you.
So, and again, these alternatives, we've looked at multiple, and John or Randy, y'all can talk to this as well too, from the personnel committee. We've looked at a lot of different options to, make it, hate to even use the word fair, but as equitable as possible across all jobs. Make it affordable for the city, short and long term. The numbers anywhere between 83 and 260,000, none of that caused me much heartburn, to be quite honest with you. That's not a lot of money in a $20 million budget that we can find somewhere to make that happen. And talk about that in just a minute. But, and one of the options we looked at that I think was a 400 and something $1,000 number on an annual basis far out. If you just took everybody to the midpoint, I mean, that it just said, go, just put everybody to the midpoint, which, is not, in my opinion, a great way. And it's not coming out of our personnel committee to go down that path. There's just a lot of pieces that go into where you're going to place people into a new salary range or how we're going to implement this. So a couple of options from a funding standpoint that we can look at. Right now, all the forecasting we do assumes 100% employment. And that's just not reality for us ever in our city, any business, any city around. So I would personally propose changing our vacant or add in a vacancy rate as opposed to assuming full employment all the time. And rough numbers, Debbie went back 5 years and looked at our vacancy rate and open positions and such. And that's about $100,000 to $115,000 a year. That's real savings that we've had every year for the last few years and probably will for the next few as well. So, I don't want anybody to think we're just waking up and, using funny money, if you will. We've just always assumed full employment. That's a way to do budgeting. That's a way to do forecasting, and that's okay. But when we're looking at doing some big wholesale change like this, this is a prudent example to me of where we could very easily change how we forecast, not affect city finances in any way, shape, or form, and create some space to implement this new wage and comp program.
Mr. Chair. just-
Yes, sorry.
That vacancy rate number, that's net of all overtime as well? Because when we have vacancies, especially in public safety, we know there's typically overtime associated with those vacancies. I just trying to make sure I understand this figure.
Yeah, this is, yeah.
It does not include the overtime.
Well, it's after that.
It's net.
Yeah.
It's
This is net.
It's the net, okay.
So this is real $100,000 roughly based on our 5-year history.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Just to comment to the other component, nobody ever hits their targeted hiring dates.
From a timing
It
standpoint.
just never happens.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
It's a
and
very reasonable assumption, Phil, to say,
is.
and I don't know what the number is, 90% probably.
it's about 92.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that we won't, maybe with the salary adjustments, we won't have as many vacancies,
Yeah.
but
That would be great.
But people retire, people,
Yeah.
there are other
Yeah.
issues. Yeah.
Life happens. So the
Some
second,
do, Jimmy.
the next bullet, this one is, again, just an alternative. Increase our transfers from tourism funds to the general fund to cover eligible personnel expenses. Fiscal 22, we're transferring from tourism funds for 4 out of 22 police officers, about 18% of our force, and about 6 of 33 fire employees, again, also about 18%. I know there's some concern here. It was changed in a few years ago, I think, to reduce that amount of money that we transferred from tourism funds, just to not have the reliance on that. You look at our trend for the last couple of years. I say use it while we have it. If we need to change it, we'll change it. It's not a decision we're putting in stone for any amount of time, but you can see Debbie's work here. If we did one position in each department, it's about $170,000 roughly. Again, I'm not, proposing necessarily any of this, but I just think it's prudent to look and review what we're doing from a tourism fund standpoint, particularly given how strong our tourism numbers are. So Susan, I think you're up first.
well, I agree that we're both I've seen greater tourism money, but also the demand, the increase in tourism, both day and overnight visitors, puts a strain on our system. So they should go together. We should be looking at whether we're spending that extra money that we're getting in well to respond to the demands that we see accordingly.
I agree. Randy?
Yeah, it's just, I think, go back a couple of years, the concern was an over-reliance. We have also in the last couple of years been incredibly conservative in our forecasting. Right, so, the conversation, Debbie, a couple of years ago was what happens if this sustainable trend in increased cost doesn't have enough offsetting revenue? Right, so I'm not asking for an answer to this, right? But it's sort of at what level do we need to sustain to be able to afford what we're trying to do? My gut feeling is we're there. That if you just take a reasonable assumption that issues like dollars per night stay or the cost of a meal or things, there are cost increases associated that do drive revenue increase to the city. And if we were to put our math hat on, I'm not going to do that for this. I don't have enough council time left. But my gut feel is what you're proposing, Philip, is absolutely doable with little stress on the city. And to Susan's point, where we're creating stress for public safety, let's spend the money and offset the burden.
Mayor?
Yeah, a couple things. And I've said this several times over the last 2 years is due to COVID, our tourism has gone up and incredible amounts of rates for houses per night. I mean, I've never seen numbers as high as they are right now. And I'm not sure when this thing goes away, are we going to stay as competitive or go down? And the other thing we always pat ourselves on the back for is no, tax increase. And our most valuable assets are our employees. And I think we really need to take care of our employees and not be afraid of a tax increase to make sure that we are on the cutting edge and have the best employees and have the best working atmosphere. So let's not always think about the tourism. We are the lowest tax rate around by far. So, let's not be afraid of maybe, I'm saying that as I go out the door.
Yeah.
It's not a voting platform.
Yeah. Well, and
Now you bring it up.
and Mayor, remember too, when I think it was one of the budget workshops last year, this year, I can't remember, every meal is a couple $100,000, rough number. So, we didn't look at a tax increase here because I feel like these two things are very prudent and non-painful. That's such a tagline. It just kind of makes fiduciary budgetary sense to me to do these two personally, and not just personally. I mean, we've had a lot of conversation around this topic. So, but there is a third bullet here. If you have other ideas, we are certainly open to looking at other ideas from a funding alternative standpoint. Taxes are certainly one of those. But if there are other conversations or topics, I'd take it, Susan.
Well, I'm going to be very curious to see how we end up with assessments, given the amount of turnover we've had in properties being purchased, because that resets the value of the property. And in the past year is resetting it at a very significant percentage increase, I would imagine, for most properties. So I know that some of them are going to be, maybe we're seeing a trend where more of them are going from rental properties, which are charged at 6% versus full-time. Maybe we'll have more full-time residents at 4%, but still, when a house that used to be valued at 500,000 on the tax rolls gets sold for $1.5 to $2 million, that is a significant amount of extra money that comes in. And when you talk about that at scale, when will we know how all that comes out in the wash?
you know, we get those annual assessments from the county that we just recently got. You know, we had a reassessment not too long ago. So what you're talking, very rarely are the appraisals that the county places on a property equal to the market, that like what you sold it for.
Mhm.
So there's a little bit of, it's not as dramatic as you might
Okay.
think.
Okay,
Isn't it capped as to the percentage increase?
And there is a 15%
Yeah,
cap in.
Okay, it can't happen.
So, yeah, it used to be called point of sale, but there's still a cap.
It's a cap.
oh, there's still a cap on there, okay, so, but it's,
There's
but
a
we
lot
should,
of dynamics that go on in
Okay.
the property tax assessment.
but we
Wow.
could expect to see some kind of boost based on the active property turnover that we've seen in the
And
past
new
year
construction.
Yeah,
and new construction.
it's the, yeah. A boost, yes. I mean, again, think about all our tax bills and the little bitty line item at the bottom that comes to IOP.
That's right.
You know, I think it's going to be negligible in the grand scheme of things. Ton of transactions for sure on the island this year. But I think even once you roll all that up and what comes to the IOP pocket, you know, so much of our tax bill goes to the county and other places. Yeah, I don't think it's going to be much personally. Ryan?
I don't belabor this anymore. The fact that the idea that we're seeing such a good increase in our tourism fund, and I think that's one of the best spots, like you said, we just take advantage of where we can and offset these costs and if we have to. If we have to, yeah, if we have to find different sources of revenue down the road, I imagine that, those tourism funds are going to continue for some amount of time and will help offset these costs.
Thank you. John?
At the risk of restating most of what Councilmember Buchanan just said and others have said, this strikes me as the right way to move forward. The only reason I chimed in to repeat that is to repeat some positions that had already been stated is to reiterate and take something the mayor said a little bit with regards to raising the mills. We've been undergoing this strategic planning process as a council. And that's maybe the one piece that I think is missing for me from this analysis. And that's no fault of Evergreen because you don't have it from us. But one of the questions they asked at the beginning was, what level of service do we expect from our different departments? And to me, that question is best answered by our strategic plan. Now, we know we want to be leading with fire and police. The extent that we want to be leading in that area, the extent that we may want to be leading or may not want to be leading and just competitive in other areas should be a direct result of the outcomes that our community wants, the level of service our community wants. And as perhaps a challenge to the next council, because it's not going to happen with us, but also to the community in terms of speaking up and being engaged, we need to define that. And we need to determine if we want to become leaders in other areas because we want to increase the level of service. And I don't know what that looks like. So that's vague and that's not a critique whatsoever of our current staff. But if we say we want them to do additional things that they're not currently doing, then that should come with additional compensation because this analysis, the study is based on what's currently being done, not necessarily what we want to be done in the future. And so this notion that the mayor puts forth that is very novel to this council, which is raising taxes, is something that would likely, from my perspective, need to be considered at some point, should we want to do that. So I'm going off on a tangent in terms of what we might want to do, but it's very relevant to this notion of the compensation analysis and thinking about where we want this city to be in the future.
Fair enough. Yeah, Randy?
Yeah, just one quick comment. When we looked at raising taxes, not that anyone here would ever do that, and you look at that percentage that you're referring to of the city, I think our ability to raise taxes in was 3-year cycle. When we were looking at whatever you can do a reset every X amount of years based on the county, the maximum increase for the city for our collection at that time across properties was $300,000, if I recall correctly. So the idea that we can raise IOP taxes independent of the council it's minuscule, right? We don't have that ability to greatly offset expense with tax increases because of that small percentage that actually comes to the city. So I think people get panicked when they go, oh, the taxes are going up. We don't control the majority of that. We control a minuscule amount of tax increase. And by the way, I totally agree with everything that's been said, but I think we need to be really, really clear. We're dependent on tourism dollars. We're dependent on the normal life cycle streams for this city to be our funding mechanism. And we have to make decisions within those boundaries and not. And by the way, to Councilmember Smith, but what we don't know is how many are, how many rental homes are becoming, resident second or full-time homes. There's a huge trend that the planning commission's working on. We don't know the outcome and will not know the outcome before we make these decisions.
Mayor.
Can I piggyback on what Councilmember Bell just said? When you look at your tax bill, and you look at the actual portion that goes to the city of Isle Palms, $400, $500, $600 a year. And you look, we got the greatest police force, the greatest fire department, the greatest recreation department, the greatest public works department, the greatest city hall staff. I mean, we get a phenomenal amount of services. I mean, Sullivan's Island does not have a full-time public works department. They don't have a recreation department. They don't have a full-time fire department. Yet their taxes are twice what ours are. So, I mean, what we get for our money in Isle Palms is incredible. So I just wanted to throw that little point out there. It's a selling point for Isle Palms.
Ryan.
Just to get back on this wage and compensation
Yeah.
analysis, ideas. One of the things that concerns me, and you kind of briefed on it just a little bit, and probably goes back to Evergreen, is the idea that, and I mentioned this in a personnel meeting, is, we're gonna set this, Mount Pleasant setting theirs, we're not sure what it is. And I'm just worried about this competitive nature and what are the steps or policies that we're gonna put in place that we stay ahead of it? And then I'm looking probably to you as well, moving down the road, how often should we review this? How often and what are the procedures for reviewing this? So that we're not in the weeds again coming forward, and that we can stay ahead of these and stay ahead of the market continuously.
So I'll go ahead and step in for that. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, come up here.
We help you exercise.
So we do recommend that the city goes and conducts a compensation study like every 3 years, and then a full compensation and classification study, such as what we just did for the city, every 5 years. So you're looking at that 3 to 5 year window in terms of doing a study. Now, it's still important every year to evaluate that plan and make sure it's keeping up with cost of living. So for instance, it's very possible that next year, the cost of living increases by 2%. It's important to increase all those pay plans by 2% to keep up with that cost of living. So I can give you a pay plan, effective January 1st next year, but if you do nothing between now and 3 years from now, you can end up in a somewhat similar mess. But if you keep up with that maintenance, keeping track of cost of living, maybe you have to adjust some pay grades as needed for recruitment and retention. Next time around, you won't have to make such drastic changes.
Yeah, good question. And you think about, so next year, think about what Social Security benefit, is going up a pretty significant amount. I think we do currently adjust our pay ranges for a cost of living. So that would help keep equity, Ryan, to your question, but an overhaul, every 3 to 5 years is needed, probably, just from a competitive standpoint.
And our current inflation rate at
Yeah.
4.2%.
Yeah.
Like that right now.
Rusty?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you. I think we very likely could see cost of living go up significantly next year, the way things are going right now. So, I mean, that's something for us to keep our eye on for sure. I don't like any of this talk about tax increases, so I'm just not going to go there. I'm pretend I didn't hear that. But, and I know we also have to keep our eye on things like that as well. But I have a lot of faith that even though this island will sort of build out, so to speak, where older homes are getting torn down and larger homes are being put up and more valuable homes, certainly. I think the outlook and sustainability for us, tourism wise, is going to be great for the future. And maybe I'm just saying that and thinking, okay, you're just kidding yourself, but we've got a great island here. We've got great people. We got great facilities. We're a place that is a destination for a lot of people. And, throughout not only the Southeast, but throughout the country, it seems. And, I think the alternative options you have here, I'd like to see us really focus on the two that we have. And if we have other things we need to mix in there or look at, then certainly we could do that. And I'm awfully happy to hear that the recommendation that to stay ahead of things, Councilmember Buchanan's point, to look at this frequently enough that we don't, feel good about ourselves by putting a wage and compensation plan in place, and then all of a sudden, neighboring municipalities have sneaked around in an end run and outflanked us again. So that's my thoughts on that. Appreciate it.
Susan?
Oh, well, I do have a question. I wasn't, but in
Clairvoyant.
terms, you read my mind. Cost of living increase, would that necessarily reflect the hot job market? Those increases in pay that we're gonna see?
So
Um,
cost of living is separate from a competitive market. So cost of living is the inflation factor. So I know one time in July, it was like 5.2%. Who knows what it is today? I didn't look because that's depressing, but that's cost of living.
Right.
Now, the hot market that we talk about, for the past couple of years, it's been police, fire, and public works. 3 years from now, that could be a different story. When we were talking about the early 2000s, it was the IT. Now, IT is still competitive, but not nearly to the extent that public safety and public works is. So that's treated independently.
And right now, it just seems like all jobs, it's a competitive marketplace. And I guess my concern is 3 years. Is that a good benchmark, given the escalation that we're seeing in general? in
You're
the
certainly welcome to
marketplace?
do them more frequently. We do have a client that we've had a longstanding relationship with, and pretty much you can set your calendar and watch to it. 3-year anniversary, they're asking us for another study. Now, this year they have crept up and have hit that 2-year mark instead. So just because we recommend 3 to 5 years doesn't mean you have to wait until, 2024, 25 to do another study. If you feel that come year 2, you want to do another study, it doesn't need to be a full compensation classification. We can just look at the pay plan. You can certainly do that.
Seems like that might be prudent, given what's going on right now.
What do you need from us tonight so we can move on?
That,
Yeah.
that right there. So here's what, here's what we'll do. We'll come back next month with about 3 options on implementation and the cost associated with that. And what all the variables are, what all the assumptions are, and what it's going to mean to our budget. And when we have most of that data now, we'll take a look with the Mount Pleasant new information. The other thing I'd like to come back, and John, if you'll take it through personnel next month, this comment about our vacation leave policy is a very easy fix. And I think we need to look at that and just do all this at one time, effective 1/1 personally. To the competitive job market conversation, I think it's anything we can do to remove obstacles in hiring, we need to do it. And that's an easy one to me on what we have, whether it's holidays, leave, vacation, whatever it is. I think we can make that a very quick action item. So Ryan, to your point, this feedback was what I was looking for. And if somebody had some other alternative for funding, happy to listen to it, but I think these are prudent. So we'll move forth and do that. And again, just want to state for everybody's benefit, we will hit a 1/1 effective date from an employee standpoint. So I don't want anybody to think we're
This
continuing.
council will conclude this
Yeah.
activity.
Yeah, we will finish this next month. Okay, Kevin,
And we just got 1.1 million
not to
from
be
the-
used for this.
from the federal government, so.
But,
No,
but we do have, we did have surplus from our last
Yeah.
budget.
just real quick, remember that American Rescue money has a whole lot of parameters around it on what and when it's got to be spent by. So just a reminder. Thank you so much. Last item, miscellaneous business. Our next meeting right now is 5 o'clock on Wednesday, November 17th. There's the 16th is what's on the city calendar. That's runoff date, if there's a runoff with the upcoming elections. So Mayor, I hope this is okay with you, because we need to combine.
No, this is great because Carl Charleston's playing UNC on Tuesday night. And I was gonna suggest
On the
that we
16th?
switch the nights.
Well, then let-
Douglas just left, John's here.
Yeah, then-
Jimmy Ward,
then let's just move it, because we need to, because council meeting is the week of Thanksgiving, so we're gonna back it up.
Excuse the term.
Yeah, so we will, so what, let's just move it to the 17th.
Councilmember Pounds?
Yes.
Just so that you know,